It's something that we talk about, sort of mystified. Is that the term? I don't know. So as we know, Saudi-Israeli normalization is the hot topic. Um, just a week ago today, Thomas Friedman, who seems sort of like cipher for this, what's important in the Middle East. If Thomas Friedman is writing about it, did a piece called "Biden is weighing a big Middle East deal" in the New York Times, and he talked about this proposition. Essentially, it's a U.S. Saudi security pact that produces normalization relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. As he terms it, it would be a game changer for the Middle East, bigger than the Camp David peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, because peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia would open the way for peace between Israel and the whole Muslim world, including giant countries like Indonesia and maybe even Pakistan. It would be a significant Biden foreign policy legacy. Okay, I think we can all understand that. What trips me up is A, how does it happen? And B, what do parties get out of it? And in this regard, we had a really good article by our friend Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Gashaian, published in the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington just at the end of July, so less than a week ago. It's called "Israeli Strategies to Preserve and Expand the Abraham Accords." And I want to go through this because it talks about the Israeli strategy and their motivation, and maybe it explains why this topic continues to be front and center, even though logically it doesn't seem like it's feasible at the moment. And before I do that, I think we need to understand that the Abraham Accords have been very successful commercially. UAE Israel commercial flows, which in 2020, at the time of the signing of the Abraham Accords, were in the tens of millions of dollars. In 2022, hit 2.6 billion, and it's expected to reach 3 billion this year. UAE has become the 16th largest trading partner for Israel. More than 1 million Israelis have traveled to the UAE since the signing, although it's been one-sided. You don't have Emiratis going the other way, or many. So on the commercial side, absolute success. On the political side, different story. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a pro-Israeli think tank, recently did a survey, and it found that only 27% of respondents in the UAE, 20% in Bahrain, viewed the accords as positive for the region. This is down from 47% in the UAE and 45% in 2020 when the accords were signed. Likewise, in Saudi Arabia, support for the accords have fallen by half to 20%. So on the streets, in the population, there's some political disenchantment with the Abraham Accords. Economically, certainly with regard to UAE, it's thriving. So let me return to our good friend Dr. Al-Gashaian's piece, and he notes three approaches. Before we get into that, and this is important in terms of, I think, perspective from the Israeli perspective. Aziz, Dr. Al-Gashaian says, for Israel, the Abraham Accords were a monumental milestone. They embodied a peace for peace formula that bypasses Israeli concessions. As Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in June 2021, the quote, Abraham Accords enabled us to get out of the equation of land for peace to peace for peace, and we did not give up a span, unquote. I'm sure you know this, Lucian, but a span is a biblical term, and it's equivalent to basically 9 inches. So here we have the Israeli Prime Minister essentially saying, we got something for nothing. Mm-hmm. And part of the political disenchantment in the UAE and Bahrain is part of the agreement that they had with Israel and the Abraham Accords was that Israel would refrain from annexing further occupied territories. And we see what's going on in the occupied territories at the moment. So, I mean, again, that's not well received in Emirati or Bahraini audiences. So anyway, here's the strategy, as according to Dr. Al-Gashaian. First strategy, focus on non-GCC periphery states and Muslim states. So Eli Cohen, Israel's foreign minister, is trying to normalize relations with Mauritania, Somalia, Niger, Indonesia. So Israel sees the Abraham Accords as it working in two spheres. One is the core, dominated by Saudi Arabia and the GCC. The other is the periphery, non-Arab Muslim majority states. So second strategy, people-to-people contacts, tacit Israeli GCC cooperation. And we see this in things like trade with the UAE, travel of Emiratis here. We just had an announcement of a leading Israeli renewable energy, solar energy tie-up with Al Ajlan and Company, which is a Saudi firm. You'll see, on Israeli television, all sorts of Gulf academics and analysts, and they're typically Emirati-based, discussing the potential for the Abraham Accords. You don't really get critics of it on Israeli, channels and that sort of thing. So, they really, and they're pushing for direct flights from Tel Aviv to Medina, and these sorts of things that are the people-to-people contacts. And to be honest, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, the commercial tie-ups, happy to see. I don't think there's a big issue with that. The third strategy, and this is really interesting, and this is where I think, Lucian, you and I sort of go, what's at the core of this? Third strategy, again, according to Dr. Al-Ghashayyan, is an excellent piece, is constant speculation. And I'll read his note. His Israeli strategy for keeping the Abraham Accords alive is inducing strategic speculation. Israeli officials and others do so by suggesting that more official cooperation or quote-unquote breakthroughs with Gulf states are on the horizon. In turn, such speculation can be politicized or even framed to inaccurately portray the Abraham Accords as vibrant and expanding. While business between the countries has continued, the Abraham Accords have become increasingly unpopular in the Gulf streets, and doubts over the merits of the Abraham Accords as a framework for regional peace have also increased. So we see this. We're deep in the news from the region every day. And, Eli Cohen, again, the Israeli foreign minister, just this week said Israel is the closest it has ever been to a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, adding that he expected a deal to be announced by next March. Also in the article is, but members of Israel's government far-right coalition have rejected concessions towards Palestinians as part of an agreement. So again, my confusion. It's apparent what Israel will gain such a deal, especially in the deal that they envision, which is not giving up anything for normalization with Saudi Arabia, which would be a tremendous coup. All right. So they're happy to throw out all this speculation and claim things are moving along, maybe inaccurately so. It doesn't change the fact that senior White House personnel, I have visited Saudi Arabia to talk about this. It doesn't change the fact that apparently, the top intelligence guy in Israel recently visited the U.S. But again, we don't know. In the readout of that Jake Sullivan visit to Saudi Arabia, they didn't mention this. But anyway, it feeds speculation. So I'm trying to understand what people would get, what the parties would get. What does the United States get? And a large part of the argument, as far as I can tell, is that such a deal would counter China's growing influence in Saudi Arabia and initiate a new era of U.S.-Saudi relations. Sort of a corollary of this, but maybe it shouldn't be a corollary, but it seems to be. Some believe it would strongly contribute to achieving a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, or more realistically, a stop to Israeli annexation of occupied territories. And some people in Biden's circle seem to think it would help in the 2024 presidential election. What does Saudi Arabia get? So what is Saudi Arabia asking for? According to Thomas Friedman and others, they're asking for a viable security arrangement with the United States, NATO-like. They're asking for greater and more timely access to key defense weaponry, and they want a green light along with U.S. participation in building this nuclear energy sector. Part of what's being sold to them is that you do this and you engender goodwill with Congress and the American public. Um, I don't know what that's worth, and I don't know how tenable that is, or how how that would stick. I mean, Congress, House in particular, is chaotic, sort of a political quagmire. Can it possibly get to uh, 2/3 of the members to vote for a security agreement with Saudi Arabia? Unlikely. So what's in it for Saudi Arabia? Prestige. They're being, recognition. They're being treated and engaged with like they are a serious middle power, of the South Korea, Brazil, and even EU types. So that's good. I think it's interesting, Lucian, and you and I are baseball fans, and MLB, Major League Baseball, just ended their trade deadline, right? I'm following closely what the Washington Nationals did. And for fans, it's always exciting because you could see if new players are acquired or current players are traded. But regardless of what you're doing, a good general manager will let it be known that a player or players are available, even if there's no intent on selling. So just to see if some team comes back with a crazy over the top, can't say no offer. It's what good GMs do. And I sort of feel that's sort of what Saudi Arabia is doing. It's floated an offer. Maybe the U.S. will take it, maybe not. Either way, Saudi Arabia gains attention, prestige, and a recognition really of its diplomatic and geostrategic value. We'll sit and wait and see. I just don't see, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, them believing for a moment that Netanyahu, with his current government, could push through any kind of change in their policies towards the occupied territories. I'm sure they understand that the likelihood of 2/3 of Congress signing off on a security arrangement is extremely long. And as they understand, and one of the reasons they're disenchanted with the U.S. is the mercurial nature, the unreliable nature of presidents in terms of coming to their defense. We saw what Donald Trump did when they were attacked in 2019. Nothing. We've seen what Joe Biden done. There's a general, belief that U.S. commitment to the region in terms of security has diminished considerably. So anyway, I don't think Saudi Arabia has open eyes. They're looking at this. They're going, all right, let's ask for this, see what happens. So you have these three parties. Saudi Arabia can't afford to play this card unless they know they're going to get what they ask for, and it's going to be the agreements are going to be honored and responsibly attended to. I mean, this is Saudi Arabia saying, in our position as an extremely influential player in the Arab and Islamic worlds, we're going to put this on the table. And I just don't see them doing that for what Israel is offering, which is essentially nothing. Or even what Israel, if they offer something, what they're capable of doing. Likewise, U.S. I wonder if in the end it's really just a long play to loosen up restrictions on defense equipment and an understanding that Saudi Arabia is going to move ahead on the nuclear power sector, and they'd really like U.S. participation, and let's find a way to make this happen. But the constant drumbeat of this is happening, this is a real thing, this is a possibility, it defies logic to me. And that was one of the reasons I thought Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Gashaian's piece was so good. And this is several times where he's provided me personally insights on what's happening in this Saudi Israel normalization. Is that a key pillar of their strategy is just to speculate constantly, and I think we all fall prey to it. So anyway, I thought there's no conclusion to this one big thing. It's really me trying to understand what the players are trying to do and why the players are doing what they're doing.
Richard, I don't have too much to add to that because I, like you, am pretty confused by it. And, like you said, we've been talking about it. We've had Dr. Aziz on the show twice now, trying to understand it, and he is just so. Not only is he great on the show, but his piece was terrific, and he's just very. I just he sees it so much clearer, at least than I do. So it's like, and so this was good, Richard, because I think it's good to sort of walk through it and say, what's happening here? Why is it so frequently discussed? It's like a story. You called it a drumbeat, just doesn't really go away. Tom Friedman, of course, a week ago wrote about it, and you mentioned that he called this a long shot at best. And you're right, Richard. What's in it for the United States? I mean, if the United States wants a stronger relationship with Saudi Arabia, it's not going to find it through Jerusalem. There are many other ways to do it. We've had Bilal Saab on the show talking about how you can strengthen U.S.-Saudi defense cooperation. There are ways to do that. But brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel doesn't seem like all of a sudden the U.S. has significantly more clout in the region and can now take on China. Just to me, that doesn't add up. Anyway, what's in it for Saudi Arabia? I think that's another great point that you made. A lot less than there was 5 or 6 months ago when it normalized relations with Iran. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're best buddies, but there's a lot less pressure there. There's not as much tailwind behind the drive to have an anti-Iran axis. I just, I agree with you. I don't see this happening. Of course, I said that it was very unlikely that Saudi Arabia and Iran's deal would stick, and maybe it won't, but just didn't seem like this. Just doesn't seem like there's anything here. And, I
Well,
mean, it's easy to say, of course, what Israel would get,
yeah.
but I think Saudi Arabia, if they're playing this correctly, and we can't really know, but they should stick with their 2002 King Abdullah peace initiative and just say, this is what we presented then. This is what we think is fair now. We can talk about it. I mean, part of what that peace initiative is normalization with all these other countries. Of course, that has changed because the UAE and others have now normalized with Israel. But I think that, to me, and everybody has an opinion on this, that was fair. Why would they go away from that? Why would they, diverge from that? What's in it for them? And I can't figure it out. And so I think that was this is good, Richard, because you hear about it, it's like, and we get asked about it all the time. Hey, are they going to normalize relations? And I don't, why would they? Why would Saudi Arabia do that? So I don't understand. So this is good.
Well, for the return that's on the table, 100%. And I agree. That's when you see the speculation, constant speculation, you go, well, why? And these things that say Saudi has put on the table. Let's set aside a security pact. So clearly, they want a more assured security commitment from the U.S. Whether that's going to be formalized in a treaty or an alliance, that's highly unlikely. But things like better access to and quicker access to important defense equipment, help with the nuclear program. You can do these. You don't have to go through Israel. This is like you're playing pool, and there's a straight shot you can take, or you can bounce it off two bumpers and try and make the shot.
Jump it over. Yeah.
Why would you do this?
Yeah. It's a great analogy.
And I think that lots of it has to do with the sway of Israel in Washington, D.C. It's an important valued ally to us, and it has a narrative that we endorse. And we've always loved its policy that we'd like to see a resolution of the occupation of the Palestinian territories. And it's, maybe this knocks them out with all three. And in my opinion, it's too, in my opinion, the simpler the better. If you want better relations with Saudi Arabia, go about it. If you want Israel to be, to change its policy on occupied territories, we have leverage with Israel. Deal with Israel directly. Again, going back to the beginning, the Israelis, as well as Arabs in general, are known to be tremendous negotiators. There's a bizarre type thing here. Well, we'll make a deal. And I just think it's striking that you literally have the prime minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, is saying very specifically that with regard to the Abraham Accords, we got something for nothing. And I think, it's in their best interest to keep trying to do that.
Yeah, and also Richard, just also going back to the U.S. The U.S. is, you mentioned this, and it's just an important point that it's not just one person saying, it's not. There's no MBS in the U.S. saying, "Hey, we're going to do this deal, and this is the deal." It goes through Congress, and that's obviously where it gets totally. I mean, that it's very likely to be derailed. But
And
also, if you just, go ahead, please.
no. But and by the way, it's Barbara Leaf. I mean, it's the State Department. Joe Biden himself said this is a long shot, and some of this is laughable. I mean, this is there's some of the stuff, and Barbara Leaf in particular said, some of the stuff coming out of Israel is just way over the top. So there's a recognition of it, but it doesn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah, and just what I was gonna just add to that is essentially that point is, if anybody thinks that this is going to move any needle in the US election that is coming up next year in 2024, they're completely off the rocker. I mean, you
Yeah,
have basically 78 indictments against the former president, including rigging the election or messing with the election, and you still basically have no erosion in support for him in the Republican Party. The Israel Saudi a deal for Israel and between Israel and Saudi Arabia is not going to change anyone's minds. I wonder how many people even know about it. It'd
yeah.
be interesting. And I also looked up, Richard, when we were talking about this, if there are any Vegas odds or any like bookmaker odds on this actually going down. There's nothing, because it just doesn't really make a difference,
Oh
or,
well,
or matter
if
to
Vegas,
anybody. So
as Vegas hadn't made book on this, then it's not real.
exactly right. I mean, maybe I didn't look deep enough. Vegas has odds on pretty much everything, which is super fun to look at. But I just, yeah, I mean, Richard, this is a good point, because it's sort of like your one big thing is that this is a very big thing in terms of its outsized media coverage, but it's actually not really a thing, and probably won't be, very unlikely to be. But there are other things that are happening that are significant and could matter. The pool playing analogy is perfect, because there are really clear wins. And President Biden, hinted at this. He said, well, they're talking, and there are these little things that
Yeah,
they're working out. Doesn't seem like they hate each other too much. This isn't going to be some big thing. Just take the wins as they're there, work with it, and then also, of course, Richard, and you mentioned, and I'm sorry to repeat for everybody, but the political situation in Israel is fairly dicey. It's not a great time to
I
be,
mean,
you know,
Netanyahu can't follow through on any of his promises with
right.
regard to occupied territories. Yeah, 100%. I think it'd be an interesting case study for somebody who's got serious chops in negotiating strategy. You see Israel at the table go, "Hey, let's just throw this out, see if we can get something for nothing." And Saudi Arabia goes, "Hey, well, what the heck? Let's ask for the moon, see what happens. We're not going to do anything rash anyway, and we're getting what we want in terms of a growing commercial relationship with Israel." I just so here's the deal. You play poker, poker, and what's the old adage? If you look around the table and you don't know who the sucker is,
You're the sucker.
exactly. And I'm really worried that's where we are with the U.S.
I just could not agree with that more, Richard. And just, I guess, the final point that I want to make is that, and you referenced it, but just the unpopularity of Israel since the Abraham Accords were signed in the UAE, and I think it was Bahrain was the other opinion poll, and that was the Washington Institute poll. It isn't like this deal that those Abraham Accords were like, they were like the greatest thing and people love it. It just seems like people are like, this is,
there's a popular upswell for let's normalize with Israel.
keep it going. Yeah. It's like, oh, most people are like, actually, this is not that great. And then you have all of this, ongoing. Really, it's not just the Israeli political situation, which was grabbing headlines big time last week, regarding the constitutional change there, but
Yeah.
the ongoing strife with the Palestinian people is just, if you're an Arab, you're looking at that saying, I don't really, normalization with Israel isn't like the top priority for me right now, seeing all this stuff going on. So anyway,
But it confirms the Israeli take is let's try and get something for nothing.
right.
And they got something, they've given nothing.
Right. It's clear what they want out of this, but
Yeah, exactly.
and of course, everybody wants a defense pact with the United States. Ukraine wants one really badly. They want to be in NATO so badly because it's clear what that means. The world's most powerful military by far, one that has been weakened, unfortunately, a little bit in terms of public sentiment behind using it as a force for good because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it is still preponderant. And
Yeah.
any state should want to be our ally and have a mutual defense pact. Why wouldn't anyone want that? So of course people want that, and Saudi Arabia wants that. But if you're trying to be objective and you put yourself in the position of a US senator from any state and are weighing this, and you think about it and you're like, so if Iran attacks Saudi Arabia, we're at war with Iran?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, so yeah,
You
Richard,
know,
really good.
I love these because I literally, when I said I'm going to do one big thing on this, mostly because I don't get it. What am I missing? And then when we were talking before this, I was saying, I don't know where I am on this. And it's just so much fun to have the conversation. This is great. This is great.
Well, so Richard, you make a good point, and it's a good time to sort of describe what we mean by this one big thing segment, right? Because we're doing this because as people know, would basically be doing this anyway, talking about these
Right.
subjects, trying to figure it out. There's stuff that the whole podcast is trying to understand the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, U.S.-Saudi relations, Saudi Arabia's position in the world better than we already do. Not completely understand it because that's impossible.
We're not Saudis.
And we're not Saudis. We're just, trying to do it. And we've had a tremendous amount of success with that as we pursue these topics. But Richard, as you know, this is not like we have some evening broadcast channel and these one big things. They sort of have a feel of like a monologue at the beginning, just so because you want to be able to dive into something,
right,
and then we discuss it. But we don't have a team of writers here that are making some editorial point and we just are delivering it. It's us actually trying to figure out what's going on and then discussing it. And so people are going to hear it's sort of the same thing with my one big thing coming up, which is basically I didn't know where it was going. And then when I got there, I was like, well, this isn't a point that I want to make. I got to walk this back and delete half of this and then see if I can make something that makes sense. But we're just trying to understand stuff. And I'm glad you did this because this has been all over the media. It still is. And it's like, doesn't really make sense. Maybe there's something we're missing. That leads you to people like, we know him obviously, but that leads you to pieces from people like Dr. Aziz Al-Ghashayyan. Just, and then so you're like, oh, I get it a little bit better now, but maybe there's just nothing to get,
Exactly. That's my concern.
Yeah. So it's good that people know that because we're on a journey here, but there is no guaranteed
come along
paradise.
with us.
Yeah.